All right, so the first step is you have to get your image into Illustrator. There's a couple different ways of doing this. What I'm used to is just seeing it in Finder. So I know I downloaded it. Here's the file. Here's Finder. It's very easy. You can just click and drag and drop. If you can see your artboard, and you just click, drag, and drop, and place it there, and then you can resize it. Please remember to hold down Shift while you resize, otherwise it stretches it. So hold down Shift and it will constrain the proportions. So I'm just going to move it here for now. You'll also, and don't forget, I'm using the Workspace Essentials Classic. So Window, Workspace Essentials Classic, that's what allows me to see all these tools around here. If I have the image selected, you'll see where it says at the top you have an option to embed. This is going to be important if you're moving your files around. So if you're just working on a laptop, your personal laptop, from start to finish, you don't have to embed. If it's not embedded, it's linked. So the file, this image file, is on the computer in Finder somewhere, and Illustrator is linking to that file so that it can be viewed and worked with in Illustrator. Now, that can save the file size in Illustrator. However, the trade-off is if you move this image or the Illustrator file to a different computer where the link to this image is not at, you will lose that image because it's still on the personal computer. It hasn't transferred over. To fix that, it is best, I would recommend for this project, to press embed. Once you embed it, now this image file is part of this Illustrator file, and so then no matter where you take it, it's going to be there. It increases the file size of the Illustrator file, but it's fine. These are not huge images anyway. Okay? All right, so we got our image into the Illustrator artboard. And then a big thing that we're going to be working with that I've talked just briefly about is layers. So over here, we have the Layers tab. If you don't see it, you can come up to Window and then click on Layers. Right now we have one layer. This is going to come in handy because as you start tracing and making all these shapes over your image, if you need to move some around or you need to select some, add gradients, stuff like that, it can get really confusing and messy if they're all on the same layer. So I would recommend doing maybe kind of dividing up into sections and then have different shapes on different layers that you can then lock after you're finished, so that when you're doing, let's say, then you start working on like the cloud up here, then you don't accidentally click and move around other stuff, and then you have to Command Z, undo it, all that kind of stuff. So, Layers tab, right now we have the layer of just the image. So I'm actually just going to go ahead and start by locking that, and then the little square with the plus symbol creates a new layer. And then we have layer 2. Now you have to be selected on that layer, and then now I can come in and start tracing over these shapes with the pen tool. Again, Command plus and minus is to zoom in and out. You're going to want to zoom in. Get up right up close to it so you can see the detail. It's going to be a real pain if it's real tiny and you're trying to like make these shapes. You're just not going to get as much detail from it. All right, so the basic process, and there's a couple different ways of doing this. I'm going to show one or two ways. It doesn't mean that these are the only ways. It's just how I'm teaching it for this class. One way I would start off with, let's say something as simple as this kind of the snowbank here. I mean, this is an easy one. It's basically just a triangle. Now, I'm ignoring some of these details to start out with, like this boulder or some of these kind of like snow drifts, things like that. I'm going to do some basic shapes first. So I'm going to go to my pen tool, and you could, just start clicking around, but you'll notice if you have the fill on, it covers up the image behind the shape. So what I would recommend starting out is turning off the fill and turning on the stroke. And you can even just choose a color, like if I choose magenta, for now, I can always change it later, but having a magenta stroke will allow me to see it a little more easily. It was kind of, it's almost basically a perfect triangle. So now, if I press my selection tool, I can click out of it, and I've just made a shape that traces the outline of this kind of snowbank here. Okay. You can go back in later and turn on the fill. You can also change the opacity here, bring it down, then go in to make another layer. This is where I would lock this layer 2 where I made this triangle, and then with the lower opacity I can see behind it. Now I can start basically making the shape of this boulder. Again, I did not turn off the fill, but it actually worked okay. Okay, and so that is the basic process. Now I could unlock this layer, turn the opacity back up. Then when you get, say you're done with the area, then you can turn off the strokes, select that. But I want this, the boulder was kind of a darker color. Turn off that stroke. And obviously, we'll talk a little bit more about colors in a second. I'm using the eyedropper because this blue is not the same as kind of blue in the image. But that's a basic process that you can use. We can use the eyedropper to select a certain color. Now, being that this is pretty much all blue, white, gray, black, there's not a lot of variety of color, but it's okay for this. So the eyedropper tool is right here. It's also keyboard shortcut I, so you can just press I on the keyboard. You have to select your shape first. You can't just press I and then choose a color. If you do, it changes the fill color, but it doesn't change anything here because you didn't have it selected. So select the shape you just made, and then this was again kind of snowy icicle color. So then I press I, and then I might select one of these. Okay, and it changes to the color of that one pixel that I just selected. And it's a solid shape. If I move it, again, obviously there is a lot of different colors of the different pixels. You have highlights and shadows, some a little bit more blue, some more white. And if I just make a big shape like this and then use eyedropper and select one pixel, it just changes it to one flat color. It may look a little weird starting off with just these kind of like big giant shapes. However, again, once you start making these details, very quickly it will start to look like one of these. Actually, let's see. No, this person's not using any gradients. So gradients work really well, and like I said, we're going to talk about those. But even if you're running out of time and you don't use gradients, there's no gradients here. These are all just solid shapes. And as you start building them up, it still turns out really great. So don't get discouraged if you start the process with a few of these kind of big shapes and you're like, man, it just doesn't look weird. Well, just wait until you finish the whole thing. It'll start coming together. I'm actually going to do, there's already this kind of gradient in the sky here. It goes from this kind of light blue to very deep dark bluish green up here. So I'm just going to use the sky as an example because it already has that kind of natural gradient in it. So I'm going to make a new layer. I'm already up to 5 layers just in this example. You're probably going to have a lot of layers, just FYI. All right, so I made a new layer. I'm going to ignore, and here's a little trick. If I want to do the sky now, I actually don't have to trace out all around these mountains and all these little crags and crevices and spikes and everything. I don't have to trace all of that. What I can do is even, actually just going to do a rectangle. Let me do it with the pen tool. I have the smart guides turned on. You'll see the magenta lines pop up. So it will snap to the edge. And I'm just going to cover the whole thing. And then let me just go ahead and take down the opacity a little bit just so I can basically see what's going on behind it. Okay. So there's a gradient tool and a gradient tab. Gradient tab looks like this. Again, if you don't see it, go up to Window and then down to Gradient. There's also, what is it? Keyboard shortcut G brings up the gradient tool. It's this icon right here. There's different ways of getting it started. It's kind of counterintuitive, but what I'm just used to out of habit is I have my shape right here. It has a fill, and on your swatches, which I have here, or I can go up here, they have a few gradients already there. I'm just going to click on orange yellow. When I do that, it adds the gradient, and in my gradient tab, I see all of my settings where I can control the colors and how much the gradient transitions from one color to the next. So it's a little bit complicated here because we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 points, color points on this gradient slider. But you'll notice as I actually, let me take the opacity, take it back up so we, just as an example. So if I move some of these around, see subtly that gradient is shifting the way the colors interact. If I want to have fewer of them, if I select one, let's say some of these middle ones, I can just click on the little trash can. You can actually just get rid of all of them except from yellow to red. I'll have orange in the middle. And I have a little slider up here. I can move this around accordingly. Okay. Now, if I want to change the color, they call them stops, but these little circles here, you can double click on the stop, and you can choose a color, and it will change that gradient. You can also use this little eyedropper, they call it the color picker. So I have this one selected, and I'm actually move this down so I can see behind it. So this one here, I'm going to select light blue, and the red over here, I'm going to select darker up here, and now we get a gradient. It's much more similar to the sky. However, you'll notice the gradient is perfectly horizontal. The transition from this light blue to the dark blue goes exactly from left to right. This is where the gradient tool comes in handy. Now you can change the degree manually here, or I mean by entering the number. However, with the gradient tool, over here on the tool palette, or by pressing Command or just G, you'll get this little line that basically shows how the gradient works. So I can move it around manually. Then I can also, if I hover over the end, my cursor changes to the little circle. I can change the rotation, move it kind of like this. So now it's starting to get closer to the way the sky is darker at the top right to bottom left. This is a linear gradient, by the way. In a little more advanced, you can change the type of gradient from linear to radial or freeform. So if I do radial, pretty self-explanatory. This could actually come in handy if I switch these around. And it starts getting a little bit closer to this darker area at the top right, lighter, bottom left. All right, for the sake of the demo, I'm going to call it for this. Move it back up. And then you're probably thinking, well, okay, that's not going to work because now it covers the whole kind of ice castle thing, whatever that was. This is where we're going to take the opacity back down so I can see behind it. I'm going to lock that layer. You can rename layers. Actually, it's locked. All right, double click on it. So just so I kind of have it organized, I can call this sky. So I know it's the sky layer. Lock it, make a new layer, and now I can trace. I'm going to do this very, very quickly. Again, I'm kind of doing this the wrong way because I have the fill turned on and not the stroke. So it's going to start covering some of my shapes, but it'll just be for the demo. Okay, so that layer is above the sky layer. If I turn the sky layer opacity back up to 100%, they were the same colors, so let me just change it white just so you can see. Now this layer is above the sky layer. If the layer is above, you don't see behind it. So this, you might have to arrange some of these. If some of them are a little bit out of order, you can click and drag layers up and down. So right now, let's say my sky layer was covering a kind of mountain layer. Because it's above, it's layer 6. I can click on the sky layer. I'm clicking and holding and just dragging it down. You see the little blue lines pop up until it goes underneath layer 6. And now the sky layer is behind it. So the point of that was you don't have to trace out the whole image of, or the whole shape of the sky. You can just have one large shape. Even for like this section here, I might have one large shape for this kind of like dark rocky area. Put that in the background behind some more layers that show they're lighter and have the waterfall and ice. So that will save you some time. Try to think about how you arrange these layers so that you're not having to kind of make all these clicks for every single one. You can just have some in the background and then add the details on top of them.